Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished delegates and colleagues, and welcome to technical session number 3 on rebuilding resilient communities, housing reconstruction, and critical infrastructure readiness. I want to say a special thanks to UNDRR, UNDP, UNOPS, WHO, the World Bank, UN Habitat, and SEEDS for organizing this session. My name is Elizabeth Riley. I am the Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, which is based in Barbados, but oversees 20 Caribbean countries. So the issue of housing recovery and reconstruction lie at the very heart of resilient recovery efforts following disasters. And in my region, we have seen substantial losses in the housing sector in the aftermath of hazard events. For example, in Dominica, in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in 2017, 29% of the damage and losses associated with Maria were actually attributable to the housing sector. And that amounted to $381 million in damage and losses of the total 1.3 billion in damage and losses from that event. So this is a very important session. We have 4 session objectives which we are trying to achieve today. First, we want to have actionable recommendations to improve housing reconstruction and infrastructure readiness frameworks globally. Second, to have an enhanced understanding of the interdependencies between housing recovery and critical infrastructure systems. Third, we want to share insights from successful and challenged recovery efforts to inform future strategies. And finally, to strengthen recovery readiness to enhance governance, financing, and inclusivity in recovery efforts. So prior to today's session, there were 3 master classes that were held. One on own-driven approaches, another on partnerships and financing, and the third on technology and innovation. There were some key takeaways, and we want to highlight 5 of those. 1, that people-led recovery builds long-term resilience. 2, we found that local knowledge combined with innovation is key to smarter recovery, and technology can be an enabler. The third key finding was that fit-for-purpose data and systems are critical to ensure inclusion. Fourth, capacity building and governance are key to effective reconstruction. And final key takeaway was that inclusive policies and equitable financing mechanisms are vital for scaling resilience. So with these in mind, during the session, we will build on these key messages and focus on how to implement WRRC priority actions to enhance readiness for resilient recovery, specifically Action 7, which speaks to enhance resilience post-disaster housing and reconstruction and infrastructure recovery. So we engage with our panel today on what are some of the actionable outcomes to make this happen. So allow me to introduce our distinguished panel to you today. To my immediate right is His Excellency Daniel Garwe, Minister for Local Government and Public Works, Zimbabwe. Kindly welcome the Honorable Minister. To my immediate left is Mr. Bhishma Kumar Busal, who is the Joint Secretary, Office of the Prime Minister, Council of Ministers of Nepal. Welcome. To the minister's right is Ella Saradurlu, who is the Urban Resilience and Settlements Lead for the International Federation of the Red Cross. Welcome, Ella. And to my far left is Ziept Nguyen Van Hoot, who is the Senior Manager for Climate Business Department, International Finance Cooperation with the World Bank Group. Welcome. And to my very far right is the very well-known Mr. Ian Davis, who is the adjunct professor of the Armita University of Kerala, India. Welcome. So we do have some housekeeping announcements for you. With respect to question and answers, online participants can place your questions in the chat, and those are going to be relayed to me. And we do have team members who are monitoring the chat, so rest assured that we will see your questions and we will direct them to the room, provided time is permitting. To ensure that online participants can follow the conversation, we just ask persons who are in the room to use the microphones, and these will be provided by the staff supporting the session. So thank you, and with that, we can jump right in. Before we get to the panel interventions, we want to welcome an opening video by Executive Director of UN Habitat, Anna Claudia Rosbach.
Colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from Nairobi. Today, nearly 3 billion people around the world face some form of housing inadequacy. Over 1 billion live in informal settlements and slums, and more than 300 million people are homeless. Climate disasters and conflicts continue to displace millions, increasing vulnerability and deepening inequality. These numbers remind us that we are living through a global housing crisis, in a world increasingly shaped by disaster and disruption. That is why this session, Rebuilding Resilient Communities, Housing Reconstruction and Critical Infrastructure Readiness, is both timely and essential. UN Habitat is proud to have joined UNDRR and UNDP in producing the masterclass series that culminates in today's discussion. Together, we are working to build capacity in cities to recover from crisis and meet one of the most urgent needs: affordable, safe, and resilient housing. In a rapidly urbanizing world, most infrastructure is tied to housing. And when disaster strikes, recovery is not just about rebuilding walls. It is about restoring lives, dignity, and the fabric of communities, especially for those living in vulnerable conditions. Throughout the masterclass series, we've seen powerful examples of recovery. We've learned about safer reconstruction approaches, large-scale technical assistance, and the vital role of financing, partnerships, and innovation. Now, the task before us is to translate these insights into policies and actions. Disaster risk reduction and climate resilience must be embedded into housing policies, land management, and urban planning, through building codes, regulatory frameworks, and recovery strategies. Rebuilding better requires institutions that are empowered, inclusive decision-making processes, and active local leadership that often leads the first responses. Housing does not stand alone. It is deeply connected to infrastructure, water, sanitation, transport, energy, and health. Only by approaching reconstruction holistically can we truly build resilient communities in the aftermath of crisis. I invite you to explore UN Habitat's new guide, Supporting Housing Reconstruction After Disasters. It draws on real-world experience and offers practical guidance for delivering technical assistance at scale. Let us work together to make housing reconstruction proactive, inclusive, and driven by people who need it most. Thank you.
Colleagues, that is a very powerful message by the Executive Director of UN Habitat, really referencing the critical role of resilient housing as being central to people-focused disaster risk reduction. And we're going to get into this topic now as we go to our panel. And my first question I will direct to the Honorable Minister. Your Excellency, the aftermath of Cyclone Idai left thousands displaced and caused an estimated $622 million in direct damages, with an estimated $1.1 billion in recovery efforts. What innovative strategies and key lessons have emerged from Zimbabwe's housing and critical infrastructure reconstruction efforts, particularly in building resilience? And what policy shifts have emerged as a result of the lessons from this cycle?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Allow me to acknowledge the presence of Your Excellencies who are present, honorable ministers who may be here, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I say good morning to you. Good morning to from the Republic of Zimbabwe. In 2019, indeed, we had one of the most devastating cyclones in the world, Cyclone Idai, which destroyed homes, livelihoods, and lives of people between two countries, the Republic of Mozambique and that of Zimbabwe. Close to about 1 million people lost their lives and lost their livelihoods, lost almost everything. We then realized as government of Zimbabwe, on the Zimbabwean side, that yes, we can come and build houses, ensure that people can have accommodation, but that was not good enough. The first port of call was to come up with the policies that speak to building houses that are sustainable, houses that are modern and affordable. There is no point to build houses that are beautiful and resilient to climate issues, but not affordable to the communities. So that was the first point of call. And we came up with a policy on human settlements development, what we call the human settlements policy, which ensures that if we're building, let's build better backwards. To replace that which was destroyed, let's build better backwards. But as we build better backwards, let's also build better vertically, given that we are a landlocked country and we are agro-based. We don't have all the land that we need to put infrastructure, so we need to utilize our vertical spaces. So we've now moved away from single-story construction to the construction of vertical buildings, flats, and so on and so forth, just in line with what other countries are doing. But we also said we also need to build better forward as we prepare for cyclones that can come anytime without any warning. We must be prepared to that. You may also want to know that last year we had one of the most devastating droughts in 45 years in the history of the country. We had almost nothing in terms of rainfall, and we are agro-based. So our CPU, our Civil Protection Department, he had to jump around, mobilize resources from all over the world to ensure that we put infrastructure that is again sustainable in terms of dam construction, in terms of irrigation facilities for agriculture, in terms of health facilities, many more things that were spoken by the lady who made that presentation. And this is how we then said, with this policy intertwined to many other policies and integrated into the SADC region, because we are one family. What affects Zimbabwe will eventually affect Mozambique, South Africa, Zambia, and so on and so forth. We have an integrated approach, and for now, Zimbabwe is the chair of the SADC region. And as being the chair of the SADC region, we are saying we must now drive sustainable development in terms of the road infrastructure, in terms of bridges infrastructure, in terms of water infrastructure, in terms of sewer management, and so on and so forth. Something that if Zimbabwe is affected, the same infrastructure that is in Zimbabwe can easily create access to the infrastructure in the Republic of South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and so on and so forth. So this is how we dealt with one cyclone Idai, and secondly with the drought that we experienced last year, just to put in place critical infrastructure that ensures we move forward with comfort, we move forward building around the communities. Community knowledge is very, very critical. We said we must not put infrastructure in place which does not include the participation of the communities. So we're building infrastructure with the participation of communities, knowing fully well that they will be the beneficiaries and the users of that infrastructure. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. And I loved your use of the term build better forward. I think this is really critical. and really encompassing the challenges that are facing many of our countries around climate change and the implications for resilient housing. So let's get another perspective to join the conversation. So I want to pose my second question to Bhishma, who's from Nepal. And can you share with us what have been major successes and challenges in Nepal's housing recovery and reconstruction policies post the 2015 earthquake? So we're looking at a different hazard. And how has Nepal reflected its multi-hazard realities into housing and critical infrastructure reconstruction, especially in vulnerable regions? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Javed. Let me put some lights on the figures of 2015 earthquake first. It was a kind of 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit Nepal in 2015 that caused massive loss of lives and property. The loss, almost 1/3 of the Nepal's population was impacted by the earthquake, and we lost almost 50% of the particular year's GDP in terms of financial loss. Almost 9,000 people were just claimed, they died. And we have to reconstruct houses, more than 800,000 houses that were damaged due to the disaster. So in terms of multi-hazard and a kind of critical infrastructure perspective, so many students were out of schools, out of health facilities, and many roads were disconnected. That's why many problems were occurred, not only the reconstruction of houses. So what we have followed is we immediately established one institution called National Reconstruction Authority. That was a dedicated institution established for the reconstruction of earthquake damaged infrastructures. For that, we came up with policies following two major principles. One was building back better, and the next principle was leaving no one behind. And the attribution of the total economic loss was almost 61% was focused to the individual houses. It means huge losses of individual houses. So following those principles, we established the NRA that I mentioned earlier, and policy guidelines were there. And immediately what we did is we conducted a massive survey and came up with very, valid data of the loss and the damage. After that, we identified the beneficiaries. We hired almost 3,600 engineers to mobilize in the field. And as you know, Nepal's topography is quite, difficult. So it was really difficult to carry out those, activities in the rural areas where it was very difficult to carry the reconstruction materials. So what we followed is owner-driven approach, and we encouraged the local materials to rebuild their houses. So it was a kind of financing, proper planning, human resource planning, aid coordination, and proper communication. Very clear guidelines, technical guidelines, how to build their houses, what kind of potential designs may be there. Those were in place. So once there was clear institution, very clear policies, and coordination of the financing, we mobilized 241 INGOs and 27 development partners to support Nepal's reconstruction and recovery. And most of the things were coordinated through a single window. That's why whatever the support was provided by any development partners or the INGOs was channelized through a single window, and they followed the country system. There was no deviation of aligning with the national systems, national guidelines, and all the funds was clearly tracked. And the people not only got the financial support to rebuild their houses, but they also got socio-technical support. And in every stages of the reconstruction, there were engineers to follow up whether the reconstruction is following the resilient principle or not. So to get the additional tranches of the housing reconstruction grant, there were engineers who followed whether they have just complied with the government mechanism or not. So it was a kind of, everything was there. Proper planning, validated data, human resource, coordinated financing, proper monitoring and evaluation mechanism. And there was a kind of, whole of the society approach. Everybody was there to support the Nepal's reconstruction. While saying this, I should not forget to focus on the part of inclusiveness. What we did is there was additional top-up for those people who are marginalized or socially disadvantaged people. They got additional $500 equivalent support. And their house, reconstruction of their houses was prioritized. Even the volunteers who were mobilized to rebuild their houses, the first priority was of those people, basically what we say Jersey people. We focused on rebuilding their houses. So it was a kind of, prioritization of, such kind of people, so that the principle of leaving no one behind will be really implemented. That is the way it was a kind of a owner-driven approach also, manifested a kind of ownership among the people so that they will build their houses as per their own need, not as indicated by the government. There was no company to rebuild those houses. Rather, the concerned particular family or the beneficiary, what we say, they build their houses using local material, getting socio-technical support from the engineers, getting finance from the government, and there was a kind of soft loan type of arrangement. If the grant is not enough, not sufficient to rebuild their houses, there was the provision of very low interest loan. So it was a kind of comprehensive and integrated approach, and we are quite proud of the support provided by UN agencies, development partners, private sector, NGOs, and the community itself.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience. And that's really a daunting task to rebuild 800,000 homes. That is a really significant challenge. And I was really interested to hear how you incorporated some general livelihood considerations as well in terms of using the local communities, local materials. So this was definitely a very good example. So let's turn our attention now to some of the broader global experiences, and I'm going to pose this next question to Ella. So based on IFRC's global experience in post-disaster housing reconstruction, what are the critical elements that ensure housing recovery is not only rapid, but resilient, particularly for vulnerable and marginalized communities? And how can governments and humanitarian actors better coordinate to align recovery efforts with long-term resilience goals rather than replicating pre-disaster risks and inequalities?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. When I read the question, on the surface, it's a very simple one, but as you think about it, obviously it's very complex. So in addition to what we have learned from many years of leading IFRC's operations, I also would like to add to that my personal reflections. So I hope you will excuse that. When I was thinking about the question, I also thought I should put some disclaimers. First of all, it says rapid but resilient. And it got me thinking, this is an oxymoron. We could talk about rapid sheltering, life-saving, life-sustaining sheltering. But as the previous speakers already talked about the daunting task of housing reconstruction, and as the executive director also said in her message, we are in the middle of a housing crisis on a regular, without, even without disasters. I think talking about resilient housing and that being rapid is not possible. Resilience is a state of mind. So it's by definition a process, and it's not a transferable commodity. So we could support people to provide rapid sheltering, but we cannot make them feel resilient. It has to come from their own sense of security, safety. So that's one thing. Secondly, I know everybody here in this conference knows it, and it has been said already a few times, but sometimes the obvious has to be stated many times by different people to drive the points home. Housing is on a well-functioning, well-regulated situation, even very complex. It is a very fickle market. It has many, many stakeholders at play. And when we add to it the post-disaster, post-conflict, or the continuous crisis situation that humanitarians and development actors are working in, and the need to adapt very fast because the disasters are coordinating better than we do. So they are having the upper hand on us. It gets very, very complex. So, and in the, so my third point is that when we talk about post-disaster housing recovery, and when we look at the way humanitarian sector works and maybe the funding works, at some point the focus shifts from individual families to more communal services. So almost the housing, individual housing recovery is seen as a personal gain. So at that juncture, we find it very difficult to find the counterparts, to take people out of that continuous sheltering situation into a housing process. So, but should we even try? And I know that the audience here, not everybody is from the sheltering or housing sector, and you all chose to be here, so I think you all care. And why should you care? Because whatever development goal that your work is trying to achieve, housing is an element that underpins it. You cannot have health outcomes, livelihoods outcomes, poverty reduction outcomes without having housing as an element and a part of that puzzle. So that's why we all need to care. So maybe I got you to the point of, oh my God, she's only talking about problems and can it even be achieved? In my experience, it can be done, but for it, you will have to have critical elements. In my career, I am actually proud to be able to say that I have done some horrible projects. I have overseen some very rushed, rapid reconstruction that did not lead into resilience. I am proud to be able to say this because we have learned from it. The sector has evolved, but we're not evolving yet fast enough. So we learned from our bad examples, and based on our bad examples, my distilled list of critical elements of when we can talk about resilient housing is, first of all, as the masterclass has already highlighted, when it's people-centered, not for or about people, but by people. I'm even developing a bit of a distance to the word participatory because it's never clear who's participating in whose process. So we have to remind ourselves, we always say, the funding timelines do not match and all that. The only timeline that matters is that of the people. We are irrelevant, and the only value that we can add is by being their ally and not trying to be a bully or a savior. So I'd like to say that. Second element is local, local, and more local. Maybe we will have more time to discuss this more, but it's only possible if we invest in the local capacities and maybe adapt or improve them through innovation and new knowledge, and also, of course, taking into consideration the new hazards, what's already there. Third one is maybe a bit specific, but if you do not have the right to stay somewhere, you cannot make long-term plans. So security of tenure, access to land and housing is critical. Fourth one for me is you can achieve it when inclusion is real and sincere. So it's not an afterthought, but a systemic part of it. And when we actually look at not multi-sectoral programming, but integrated programming, And when we look at the house also as part of the environment that it sits in, so looking from a settlements approach. With this last point, I'm not saying that a single stakeholder has to do everything. It's not possible, but we do not have the responsibility to do everything, but we have the responsibility to coordinate and to work with others who can add value to the work, the little bit that we can bring to it as international humanitarian sector. So I will leave it at that, and then maybe we can go into some of these points in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ella. And you shared a lot. And I think the key message for me emerging was really about all of the learning that takes place as we go through the processes of trying to ensure that affected populations have appropriate housing. And I know we can get into the detail in the discussion, but right now, let's talk a little bit about the money. Most of our presenters have actually touched on the issue of the financing of how we address housing, recovery, and reconstruction. So I want to pose my next question to Ziep, the money lady. What are some innovative financing mechanisms and solutions in your experience that have worked well for housing recovery and reconstruction? And how can we scale financing for resilient infrastructure?
Thank you, Elizabeth. So let me, I will get to financing, but I'd like to talk about financing within the ecosystem of integrated planning. At the IFC, which is the private sector lending arm of the World Bank Group, at the IFC and World Bank, we practice in a whole integrated ecosystem. We first invest in prevention because we know that investing in prevention and improving resilience is a greater investment, greater return on investment than just spending money on post-disaster recovery. We know that most money these days, most financing is spent towards post-disaster recovery, but that's because there aren't enough incentives to invest in prevention mechanisms. And so for prevention mechanisms that improve resilience, we have to focus on the issue of design. You have to design infrastructure better in order to withstand disasters. For example, when I was financing a project, a big road project in Nepal, there were increasing landslides in Nepal due to disasters and weather patterns. And so what we did there was use local plantings, local plants. So this is nature, leveraging nature solutions, local plants to stabilize the slope and prevent slope and slope erosion. Same in Yemen. When we were building a road in Yemen, we were looking at drainage issues and how to steer water from floods to farm fields that could actually benefit from the water. From a housing perspective, we have developed housing and infrastructure perspective. We've developed a suite of tools to improve planning for resilience. Our suite of tools for green and resilient building are digital tools that are made available online, accessible to everyone in the world. The first is our Apex Green and Resilient City Planning Tool. We use this tool to help cities look at their GHG emissions across the critical infrastructure systems, including energy and built environment, transport, water, and waste systems. We then work with the municipal government to plan out investments that reduce emissions, but also at the same time improve resilience. And these investments are both public, they're public sector investments, as well as private and PPPs. For example, investments in bus transport systems tend to be PPPs, where the government will invest in the charging infrastructure, for example, and the roads, whereas the private sector will buy the buses and operate the buses. And these days, we tend to encourage electric buses. For one example that we did recently last year was helping the city of Cape Town use the APEX tool to plan their green and resilient city. And then we lent the city of Cape Town over $300 million to invest in those measures. We also have the Building Resilience Index, which is a tool that helps building owners, asset owners, assess the resilience score to climate change risk and earthquake risk, and encourages investments that improve the resilience score. And then we also work with insurance companies to adjust their pricing to the resilience score of the assets. And this runs across all types of assets, could be commercial office buildings, malls, hotels, to schools, housing, all kinds of hospitals, so all kinds of infrastructure. And then we work with governments on policies that incentivize green and resilient building. For example, the government of Colombia offers tax incentives for investments in housing that are green and resilient. And we have worked with the government of Colombia, as well as Peru, Brazil, many governments around the world, to design incentives for green and resilient housing and building. Government of Peru, for example, offers extra floors if you build green and resilient. Government of Kenya offers land for housing if you build according to these green and resilient measures. In terms of financing, there are so many examples. At the national and municipal level, the World Bank has offered catastrophe bonds, which is a form of parametric insurance that allows insurance companies to pay insurance companies, as well as all kinds of pension funds and all kinds of private investors that invest in catastrophe bonds, that basically have a standard payout according to triggers of events, not according to how much losses you bear. And by structuring this way, you're providing an incentive for building resilient from the start, building with resilience measures from the start, rather than waiting for an event to happen, and then also wasting a lot of time to assess the losses. We also use green bonds. The World Bank and IFC are among the biggest issuers of green bonds and sustainability bonds. And these green and sustainable bonds basically have triggers and KPIs for green and resilience. So we have measures in there for building with resilience KPIs. And at the corporate level, they're called sustainability-linked financing, where we build in incentives for corporations to meet resilience targets, as well as green targets. So we can have targets that are linked to GHG emissions. We can have targets that are linked to the resilience score of assets. And if a company achieves those targets, then the interest rate linked to the financing that we offer them goes down, step down. And if they don't meet those targets, then it's a step up, or the insurance or the interest rates go up. And we also, of course, leverage blended finance. One of our most successful blended finance programs is called MAGIC, which is Market Accelerator for Green Construction. And there, we basically build in incentives in our financing for green and resilient construction. We have measures and indicators for how to build green, how to build resilient, and we build incentives in there. So corporations that borrow from us will have a lower interest rate if they build according to these green and resilience measures. And so basically, and Elizabeth, you're from Barbados, so I'd love to talk about one of the projects that we have invested in at the IFC to help Caribbean islands such as Barbados deal with their energy infrastructure. So islands and isolated regions like Barbados are still relying these days on diesel gensets. And also the transmission and distribution infrastructure is also quite fragile. And there we're investing with the government of Barbados, as well as private sector companies, in renewable energy battery energy storage, and also green hydrogen as green hydrogen that leverages the renewable infrastructure to basically act as an energy storage mechanism. And it's not an easy project. It's not bankable on its own, and therefore we were able to leverage blended finance from the Green Climate Fund. So basically, this is a whole ecosystem of financing instruments that are available. Actually, apologies, one more. There are many more, but one more. In India, we work through banks and housing finance agencies to offer green mortgages to homeowners. A lot of the housing in India, as well as many developing markets, are self-built housing. Low income, low value housing for homeowners, and they tend to build themselves. And so we work through these housing finance agencies to provide the financing to homeowners that build to the standard that we specify, which is, and by the way, our international standard for green construction is called EDGE. Green building. It's the one of the best known green building certifications in the world. And so we work through these housing finance agencies and commercial banks to provide green mortgages to homeowners, as well as loans to developers and contractors. Let me stop there.
Zia, thank you so much for making it very clear to me that it's not just about the money. And I think that's really the key message there. And I think the real value of the approaches is that you're really taking a very comprehensive, holistic approach to the whole conversation, not just about providing the financing, but also looking at the individual context of the beneficiaries, and also looking to see how you can bring those green approaches to be more environmentally friendly, in addition to being resilient. So thanks so much for that. I really appreciated learning at your feet today. All right, so colleagues, we've had a diversity of interventions covering different hazards, looking at financing, broader lessons. So what we want to do now is to get some final thoughts from our panelists before we go to our audience for questions. I've already seen one come in here, so online audience, you're free to send your additional questions. So I'm going to change the order just a little bit in terms of the final perspectives to allow the Honourable Minister to go last. You'll have the opportunity to sum up after you've heard the others. So let's go to Ella first for your final thoughts, and then I'll come to Bishma, Ziep, and to finish off with the Honourable Minister. So you have about 1 to 2 minutes to give final thoughts.
Okay, I can definitely tell you that it's not going to be my final thoughts, because I will keep thinking about this topic, as we all should. I think I would like to maybe wrap up with more like a call for action for everyone, and to like interpret it from your own perspectives. So we have to make locally led action default, not nice to have default. We have to trust, fund, empower local actors. And as Toni Morrison has said, if you have some power, your job is to empower someone. So let's embody that in our actions. Secondly, it's a bit awkward to be saying this maybe in a DRR conference, but again, obvious has to be stated. Invest ahead of disasters, and do that by getting out of our comfort zone. Humanitarians, we are focused on community resilience, but housing recovery and resilience cannot be achieved only by community resilience. You have to look at organizational resilience, legal systems. We sometimes shift between some buzzwords, DRR, anticipatory action, early warnings for all. It is not or, it is all of it. So let's also look at it in that way. Thirdly, recovery coordination mechanisms. Humanitarian coordination does not flow seamlessly into recovery coordination. There is a huge obstacle for all of us there to overcome. There are good examples like in Nepal and Pakistan, so we can learn from it. And then my last point is that, again, a bit of a tough one for humanitarian sector. We have to break the cycle and look at the root causes of risk at the center of the action. We are very reactive, but we do not really address risk drivers most of the time. Other speakers and their stakeholders are doing that. But as humanitarians, we also have to learn and get comfortable working with up the chain and also monitor our success in terms of equity and resilience. So do not consider a program a failure if nobody is living in the house that you have built, but look at whether that family has exercised agency, whether they had more choice, whether they are safer with where they are now, and are they closer to the life they want. I think this is how we should be looking at our work from the humanitarian side. Just as a closing sentence, I want to say, reiterate 3 convictions that Ian has actually written in his book, 1982, and they are still very valid. So we have to look at the house not as a delivery of a tangible product, but it's the process of sheltering, and that has to lead to housing. Second one was that shelter cannot be confined to a phase. It has to lead to safety and well-being. And third one was shelter is not merely a structure. It has to be regarded as a foundation for rebuilding everything that a life rests on. I'm rephrasing. But I want to leave all of us with that question. It's 45 years since we know this, but we're still discussing it. So are we really ready, able to take and willing to do what's necessary? And if not, what will it take us to do it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ella. And I'll invite Bhishma. Final thoughts, 1 to 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Basically, after 2015 earthquake, we not only reconstructed more than 800,000 individual houses, but also rebuilt more than 9,000 critical infrastructures, including schools, health facilities, cultural heritages, roads, public buildings, and many more. While performing such a huge task within 6 years of time, as of my experience, what really worked in Nepal in case of our country is housing reconstruction should be supported by clear and implementable policies, credible data, inclusive planning, flexible financing, robust technical standard and monitoring, mechanism for resilient house building, effective communication of the messages, socio-technical support for individual houses or the beneficiaries, ensured land entitlement, prioritization of the marginalized and disadvantaged section of the society, parallel reconstruction of the critical infrastructure, smooth coordination among different stakeholders, livelihood programs embedded with the reconstruction programs, and a grievance handling mechanism. I would like to reiterate that 171,000 additional houses were built through the grievance handling mechanism in Nepal. To go through all the stories and the mechanisms that made Nepal's case success is published by UNDP. You can go through the website and find it. It is the name of the book is Handbook on Owner-Driven Housing Reconstruction. That book was published on the basis of Nepal's experience. That will be really helpful to have some sort of few insights to rebuild houses, basically individual houses affected by disaster. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bhishma. Zia?
So we need to build in a comprehensive ecosystem that mitigates risk, through better design tools, through having international standards, and through incentives, through incorporating incentives in national policies, municipal policies, as well as financing that incentivizes building according to resilient standards.
Thank you so much, Zia. And Honorable Minister, you have the final word.
Thank you very much. Every time a country is seized with a situation like a disaster, be it a cyclone or a drought or a winds, there are lessons drawn out of that. And in the Zimbabwean context, when we had the cyclone in 2019, we obviously drew a lot of lessons. One of the key lessons we learned was integrating gender-sensitive approaches in how to deal with these issues. Today's communities are now different from yesterday's communities, which were more masculine or men-driven. Today's communities are driven by women's effect of life, and we need to ensure that women and children participate in all the approaches that we do or that we employ in dealing with these issues as we prepare for better, resilient, and effective infrastructure. Employ also community-based disaster risk management approaches. Let the community be part of it. Don't just come as government or as aid providers and say, this is what we have, this is what we're doing for you. It will be a them and us attitude. So the community will take a back seat and will look at you doing whatever you are doing when you're gone. They will go to their comfort zone and start building their own shacks, for lack of a better term. So you need to involve them, let them understand what you're trying to achieve, that you are trying to save their lives, in governments or the authorities that are coming have got their lives first more than anything else. So they must be part of the development program. They must be part of the resilience building approach. I want to agree with my sister here that resilience is a psychological issue. It starts in the mind. So if the people that are being held that do not have the right framework of mind, you experience a lot of resistance and things like that. Or they will migrate to another area of another comfort zone area. Human settlements is about planning and governance. I mean, we have migrated from Stone Age to Cave Age to everything. We are now into this era where every settlement must be properly planned and must be properly governed. I think the third world right now is seized with a situation where we have informal settlements. In other parts of the world, they are called slums. Where I come from, we call them irregular settlements. We now need to help those people or have laws in place that are strong enough to convince anyone who wants to build any kind of infrastructure that there has to be a planning process to take place first. When that planning process has taken place, we must have on-site and off-site services provided if it's in urban areas before anything else is done. Because born out of these diseases are waterborne diseases. We have diarrhea, we've got dysentery, we've got all sorts of things that will come out of that. So if we provide what we are calling sustainable infrastructure after a disaster, but without proper planning, then we are still orbiting at the same space, because new disasters will emerge out of the communities in terms of waterborne diseases. So we need also to develop strong disaster risk management laws that people are at least informed, they are aware that yes, we provide housing, and housing, we all know that it's enshrined in the United Nations Charter that it's a fundamental right, and many constitutions in the world, different countries have got it as a fundamental right. Because it's a fundamental right, governments have got a responsibility to provide, working together with the private sector and the other actors. It's really critical that we have strong policies, human settlements policy, as I conclude, and the disaster risk management legislation that ensures that people are aligned, and let's not leave women and children behind as we deal with these issues. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for those insightful words, Honorable Minister. So we did have a question on the board, but the question was largely around the integration of critical infrastructure with land use planning, and we did speak to that quite a bit in the discussion. So, and we are a little bit pressed for times, just for our online viewer to note. So I'll go straight to our closing speaker and introduce Mr. Ian Davis, and he's going to share with us his key takeaways and reflections from his experiences, but also from the contributions that were made today. Ian?
Thank you very much. It's a very unenviable task to try and summarize just what we've been hearing. And I had the great privilege of taking part in the masterclasses that have preceded this event, and it was a daunting task then as well, because the sheer complexity of housing, of infrastructure, and of how housing relates to disasters or how housing relates to ongoing crises is something which is baffling, and we've seen this afternoon, this morning rather, just how complex it is. I've been involved in this subject for far too long. I started in 1971 and have been coming to Geneva off and on over those years. And it's been an exciting journey, but I'm now in my 88th year, so it's interesting to reflect back on all that's been happening. I remember when I was doing a PhD on this subject, I had a very eminent tutor, Otto Königsberger in London, and I went along to see him, and he said, "What are your conclusions about shelter following disasters?" And he said, "You seem to have sent me a piece of paper with 15 conclusions in it." I said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because it's so complex, and I'm trying to grapple with this for a UN study and for my PhD." He said, why have you come up with 15 variables, 15 factors?" He said, "People won't remember them." He said, "How about one?" I said, "Totally impossible, Otto. I can't produce one." He said, "Come back next Friday with one." And so off I went and sweated greatly all week and came back with one, which said something in the order of the primary resource in the provision of sheltering, not just shelter, comes from the local affected community. Other people can help, other agencies can help, but they must never duplicate what the family concerned is doing. They are the primary actors. Support them, empower them. He said, "Yes, that'll do." So that was it. And later on, the head of IFRC working in shelter, Graham Saunders, greatly missed. He passed away some years back. He came to see me in Oxford and said, we want to reprint the UN document with IFRC because of that finding, because we want to emphasize people-centeredness. And that's been so gratifying this morning, just to hear how many speakers have been emphasizing the centrality of what goes on in people and how we can support them. I can hardly begin to grapple with this. Our panelists were asked to come up with one final thought. Most of them came up with far more than one final thought. They had lots and lots of final thoughts, and so do I. But I think perhaps just a few words which came up in the masterclasses and are coming up again today. The sheer complexity of this subject. Let nobody underestimate how complicated it is. It's far more than 15 factors. And it's interdisciplinary. It's where architects talk to social workers, where they talk to economists. And what's so gratifying today is to see all these people who are putting on this event. SEEDS, Community-Based Disaster Risk, the World Bank with its fantastic set of tools and wonderful approaches to incentivized financing, UN Habitat setting new standards for how to manage housing recovery, UNOPS with all their vital role, and UNDRR bringing things together in a remarkable way, as we heard in that brilliant talk by Kamal this morning. So the complexity is a source of congratulations. And we were asked, what is a success story from today? Well, one success story is you being here, from so many people crowding into this room, and all these organizations working together. there's an old saying, everybody believes in coordination, but nobody wants to be coordinated. But we're beginning to see real coordination happening, and I just congratulate my colleague from the Federation because of the clusters. The global shelter cluster is one of the great success stories of the 21st century. So the complexity, we can't begin to talk about it, except never underestimate the problem and look at it and work with colleagues from different disciplines. As our keynote talk said this morning, I've got 2 minutes left, I'll be very quick. She spoke about the crisis that occurs. And the crisis is not just these massive disasters like what happened in Nepal or the tsunamis. It is, in fact, the ongoing climate crisis and the ongoing urbanization crisis. And we've just heard from the WMO and other groups that the sea level rise might well continue despite reaching our carbon targets. It might continue on its present course for over 200 years. And so we are embedding into our society these continual crises, and they have to be managed and looked for. We heard a galaxy of suggestions about finance. How wonderful that we've got incentivized financial systems that put sustainability and green finance and resilient futures ahead of us. And it's a very positive approach. So congratulations to the bank for all that they're doing and all these tools. It's a great toolbox that we can delve into and find information on. And we've got these wonderful tools like digital mapping, where we can map things. Why was Notre Dame rebuilt so quickly? The answer is they had a digital map of the entire cathedral and they were able to apply it and rebuild. We need to use these wonderful powers of digitization, AI, and so on to give us this toolbox, which when I began in this field just did not exist. I think there are many other factors to talk about, as well as the how to make everything not just useful, but usable. How to make housing affordable to people, how to make sure they're in the driving seat. And the difficulty that all agencies have, and I've been on the board of NGOs and things like that, the difficulty we have of all the time being facilitators, being enablers, enabling something to happen which is outside ourselves, not wanting to take the credit, not wanting to wave a flag saying, look what we've done. To assist them in their key role of providing for their family and sorting out these appalling problems. I just feel we should give fantastic congratulations this morning to what's been happening in Zimbabwe and Zambia and Nepal and all these countries where hard-pressed governments with lack of international finance are doing heroic things. I'm coming away from this meeting full of excitement and joy, because I feel that the problems are being tackled constructively and positively with great confidence. And we're seeing the UN agencies and the NGO community combining to really get a grip on it in a way that I don't think I've seen in these 53 years that I've worked in the subject. So thank you all, and thank our speakers for such brilliant presentations. I've been sitting here learning and trying to scribble answers, but wonderful, and really appreciated all this opportunity which has been presented to explore these subjects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian, for those amazing insights and observations and an amazing synopsis of everything that was said today, but also sharing from your own vast experience. And we really appreciate that. Thank you so much. So colleagues, there we have it. And key messages: complexity, becoming even more complex as a result of conflict, as well as what's happening with the climate crisis, and maybe 6 key points and recommendations emerging in treating resilient housing. It has to be beneficiary-led and appropriate, policy-based. We have to look at economic opportunities, particularly for those who are affected, partnerships which are coordinated, a holistic approach to financing, and finally, the point on leveraging technology. So that's it in a nutshell. I want to say thank you so much to our panelists today, His Excellency Daniel Garwe, Minister of Local Government and Public Works Zimbabwe, Mr. Bhishma Kumar Busal, who is the Joint Secretary, Office of the Prime Minister, Council of Ministers in Nepal, Ela Sardarolu, who is the Urban Resilience and Settlements Lead at the International Federation of the Red Cross, and Ziep Nguyen Van Hoot, the Senior Manager for Climate Business Department, International Finance Corporation of the World Bank Group, and finally, of course, and by no means least, Mr. Ian Davis, who's the Adjunct Professor at the Amrita University, Kerala, India. My name is Liz Riley. Thank you so much for joining us for today's session. I hope it was very enlightening for you and as much a learning experience for you as it was for me. Have a great day. Thank you.